As we go to air tonight, the United States of America is unravelling for all the world to see as race riots leave many of the nation's biggest cities burning in almost unimaginable scenes. Across the country, police are in the line of fire, facing the rage of protesters following the death of a black man at the hands of officers. The wave of violence has now washed across 29 cities, from New York, Los Angeles, New Orleans, Seattle and Minneapolis, ground zero for that anger and outrage now being vented by so many Americans. We have our US team on the ground. Bureau Chief Ashley Mullaney begins our coverage.
Police unleash force in a country gone to hell. A loaded assault rifle snatched by a private guard at gunpoint as officers are dangerously outnumbered. Their cars on fire. Looters take over. As Saturday night anarchy reigns through America. This is Beverly Hills. High-end stores loot. Fairfax near Hollywood, a battleground. LA has survived a history of race riots. It's in one again.
It's one of our darkest days when I saw it last, and it's repeating.
This time it's nationwide. New York, under siege.
Leave him alone! Don't get out of here!
In Minneapolis, it felt different.
State Patrol has just arrived, preparing to take on these protesters and throwing flash grenades right now.
Go!
Tonight, police have had enough.
It's a revolution.
A weekend escalation was the fear. As night fell, America unravelled before our eyes. A block from the White House, buildings burn. The National Guard moving into American streets. Not just the big cities, even Ohio is under attack. In the home of country music, Nashville City Hall is set alight. Violent,
fear here
crowd. Curfews are now imposed in multiple states.
Get inside! Get inside!
Here's an arrest. Here comes another one.
A new lockdown from a new spreading threat. In virus-hit New York, pleading, begging for this to end.
This civil unrest, these violent demonstrations, these riots are not exclusive to America. This revolution is global. This is occurring in many countries around the world. Denmark, Germany, England, Austria, and Brazil all have this revolutionary spirit. Education, page 228. The centralizing of wealth and power, the vast combinations of the enriching of the few at the expense of the many, the combination of the poorer classes for the defense of their interests and claims, the spirit of unrest, of riot and bloodshed, the worldwide dissemination of the same teachings that led to the French Revolution are all tending to involve the whole world in a struggle similar to that which convulsed France. According to this text, the same unrest and riots and bloodshed that was witnessed during the French Revolution in the late 1700s will occur around the world at the end of time. This will be a worldwide revolution because the extremely wealthy of the world, the 1%, are taking advantage of the underprivileged. The text says the centralizing of wealth and power. During the French Revolution of the late 1700s, this was the nobility and the clergy. They had all the money. They were the 1%. The enriching of the few at the expense of the many. The many was everyone else. They had nothing. They were the peasants, the 99%. The 1% implemented a system that made them wealthy, but disenfranchised the poor. The spirit of unrest, of riots and bloodshed. This is the angry mob, a revolutionary spirit that hates the government and hates religion, and ultimately got control of the country through intimidation, fear, and violence. And the same teachings that led to the French Revolution are all tending to involve the whole world and bring about the closing events of Earth's history. The French Revolution is the single most important event in European history. It got rid of the Catholic Church. It eliminated Christianity. It got rid of the nobility. They executed the king. And a new republic was born in blood. This was the French Revolution. The year was 1789, and France was completely bankrupt because of two wars. The first war was the American Revolution. England was France's mortal enemy. And since France did not want Great Britain to expand its empire, France bankrolled the colonialists, and America won its independence in 1776. The second war was the French and Indian War. It's also known as the 7-Year War. Because of those wars, France became bankrupt. But you wouldn't know it from looking at the king and the queen, because any remaining finances or personal money that they had, they lavished it on themselves. The king and the queen, the nobility and the clergy, they were all living good. They were the landowners, the landlords. They didn't pay any taxes, and they dressed well. This was the 1%. The peasants, they were the 99%. They did all the work. They paid all the taxes, and they had nothing. They didn't even have food to eat. They were starving. The people were starving, and they told the king. Subsequently, a meeting was called to address this problem. It was called the Convocation of the Estates General. 3 estates would attend the meeting. The first estate was the nobility. The second estate was the clergy. And the third estate was everyone else. The meeting would be held at the Palace of Versailles. The Palace of Versailles was the royal residence of King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette. Versailles was located in the suburbs 12 miles west of Paris, France. The Palace of Versailles was a breathtaking piece of real estate, equipped with a personal theater, a hall of mirrors including fabulously illuminating chandeliers, an exquisite ballroom with cathedral ceilings, and corridors of gold and silver ornaments, and numerous precious paintings. All of this accentuated the wealth gap between the 1% and everyone else in France. On the day of the meeting, the nobility and the clergy voted together, and they left. And that meant that there would be no changes to the current arrangements. When the people had arrived, they felt slighted, knowing that their single vote meant nothing. And King Louis resented their presence, and he was rude to them. So the people left Versailles, and they went back to Paris. But they were still hungry, and now they were very angry. The military appeared in Paris, and the people felt that they were sent by the king to spy on them. So the people broke into the Bastille, that was the prison, to get rifles. They armed themselves. And many prisoners escaped, and the crime rate escalated in Paris. The people heard a rumor that King Louis had wheat. They thought that the monarchy was hoarding food. So an angry mob marched back to Versailles with guns and rifles. After an exhausting 6-hour walk, 20,000 people, mostly women, arrived at the Palace of Versailles. They didn't find any food, but the people had a lot of questions, and they didn't like the answers that they got from the king and the queen. So they forced King Louis and Queen Marie Antoinette to return with them to Paris because the people didn't trust them anymore. Because of constant riots, instability in the government, and poor living conditions for the monarchy, King Louis and Marie Antoinette became very troubled by these new circumstances, and they decided to flee Paris. They disguised themselves as servants. They got into a carriage and attempted to flee to Austria. But they were captured days later in Varennes, when the king was recognized at a checkpoint. King Louis and Marie Antoinette were returned to Paris. The people of France now believed that the king had betrayed them. This was terrible. And Maximilien Robespierre, the leader of the Jacobins, floated the idea of killing the king. Revelation 11:3. And I will give power unto my 2 witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. The 1,260 days is 1,260 years, a period of time known as the Dark Ages, from 538 to 1798. The 2 witnesses are the Word of God. It's the Bible, the Old and the New Testament. In great difficulty and under terrible persecution did the Bible testify about Jesus as an offering for sin, and prophesied about his second coming. Great controversy, page 269. It had been Rome's policy under the profession of reverence for the Bible to keep it locked up in an unknown tongue and hidden away from the people. Under her rule, the witnesses prophesied clothed in sackcloth. Clothed in sackcloth means suffering and great sorrow. By the 5th century, the Bible had been translated into over 500 languages. Remember, the papacy was officially established in 538 AD. 100 years later, by the 6th century, the Bible was written only in one language, the language of Latin. The papacy had destroyed all other translations. People were forbidden to have Bibles. They were told that they were too ignorant to read it. It was chained to library walls, and the people were told only a monk or a priest could explain it to them. In the 11th century, we saw the appearance of the Waldensians, a godly group of men, women, and children. Desiring to share the light of the gospel with the world, they put handwritten portions of the Bible in their clothing, and they went into town as merchants, and they shared it with whoever was interested in knowing Jesus, the Lord, the giver of life. The Waldensians knew that they were risking their life, and many of them paid the ultimate price: jail, torture, and death. John Huss, Jerome, and William Tyndale were among those martyred. They were tortured and they were burned for preaching the Bible, for giving a clear testimony of God's love for the human family, righteousness by faith, and God's forgiveness for sin because of Jesus, the crucified Savior. But there was a problem. Most people never heard the true gospel. Eternal torment in hell was preached instead of the gospel. Punishment was emphasized instead of God's mercy. The papacy taught that God was waiting to punish man for the smallest of infractions, and the only way that they would obtain relief from God's wrath was to pay indulgences. People were told by the priest that they would have to pay money or should expect to go to hell. But the people were broke. They didn't have any money. They didn't even have money for food to eat. They were starving. So the people felt condemned because of their poverty. They certainly couldn't pay for salvation. They began to believe that God favored the wealthy and condemned the poor. The people began to hate the monarchy. They hated the clergy, and they hated religion. Revelation 11, 7 and 8. And when they shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, and shall overcome them and kill them. And their dead bodies shall lie in the street of that great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. This brings us right to the end of the 1,260 years. The devil was unable to extinguish the light of the gospel. The Bible proclaims salvation through Jesus Christ. And the beast was so angry, war was declared on the word of God. The text says Egypt, because this is the spirit of atheism. It says Sodom, because this is the spirit of immorality and homosexuality. Great controversy, page 268 and 269. When they shall have finished their testimony, The period when the two witnesses were to prophesy clothed in sackcloth ended in 1798. As they were approaching the termination of their work in obscurity, war was to be made upon them by the power represented as the beast that ascended out of the bottomless pit. But here is brought to view a new manifestation of satanic power. The beast from the bottomless pit was to arise to make open and avow war upon the word of God. Thus began the Age of Enlightenment. This was an intellectual and philosophical movement that dominated most of Europe, an era in which men prided themselves on new ideas that were fascinating and profound. They were the intelligentsia of society: doctors, teachers, lawyers, and scientists. Men such as Voltaire, a French philosopher, Thomas Paine, a British author, John Locke, a British journalist, and Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher. Their ideas were widely circulated through meetings at scientific academies, Masonic lodges, literary saloons, coffee houses, and in bookshops and journals. Central doctrines of the Enlightenment was the opposition to the monarchy and complete rejection of religion. They questioned the divine right of rulership. Why should we accept King Louis as the king? Louis should have to prove his right to be king, and the church should have to prove its authority also. The people blindly accepted the ideas of these free thinkers, not knowing that their minds were being poisoned. They believed that they could live in a free society without law and apart from God. Thomas Paine wrote a book. It was entitled The Age of Reason. It was the reasoning of men's minds. It was an attack against God, and it was a rejection of the Bible. The people of France read that book, and the results were awful. They began to tell lies. They stole from each other. They committed fornication, adultery, and homosexuality. They were not ashamed of their filthy behavior. They were not ashamed of their immorality. They drank alcohol and indulged in debauchery. Every kind of personal pleasure you can imagine they indulged in. They committed murder. Murder was not beneath them. The people of France set up a prostitute, the image of a vile woman, a dancing girl. And they set her on a cart and paraded her through the streets of Paris. They called her the goddess of reason, and they worshipped her. Great Controversy, page 273, 274. The beast that ascended out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them and shall overcome them and kill them. The atheistical power that ruled in France during the Revolution and the Reign of Terror did wage such a war against God and His holy word as the world had never witnessed. The worship of the deity was abolished by the National Assembly. Bibles were collected and publicly burned in every possible manifestation of scorn. The law of God was trampled underfoot. The institutions of the Bible were abolished, and the weekly rest day was set aside, and in its stead every 10th day was devoted to reviling and blasphemy. Baptism and the communion were prohibited, and announcements posted conspicuously over burial places declared death to be an eternal sleep. Maximilien Robespierre was the leader of the Jacobins. The Jacobins was a radical political organization in the late 1700s, closely associated with the Illuminati and bankrolled by the Jesuits. Robespierre told the people France was rightfully theirs and that they would be a self-governing people. All they had to do was kill the king. On January 21st, 1793, King Louis XVI was guillotined. Because of the general outcries about the inhumane methods of hanging, the guillotine was introduced as the next stage in the development of capital punishment. It was called the National Razor. It was a 10-pound razor blade. And the process was quite simple. After being condemned by the French National Convention, the prisoners were led from court, hands tied behind their back, packed into a cart with 20 or 30 other condemned prisoners, and transported a short distance to the Place de la Révolution in Paris. When the wagon load of victims arrived, an angry, bloodthirsty mob demanded their execution. That razor labored long and hard from sunup to sundown. Pools of blood running into the streets of Paris was a common scene. 20,000 people were killed in 1 year. Anyone who opposed the revolution would be guillotined. This was the reign of terror. France renounced their belief in God. They denied the very existence of God. They burned Bibles. You are not allowed to have a Bible. All the institutions of the Bible were forbidden. Marriages were annulled. Baptisms were outlawed. Churches were closed. Discussions about religion was condemned. Prayer was also a capital offense. And if you even looked religious, you were guillotined. This was the beast from the bottomless pit. This is the spirit of revolution. The Life of Napoleon, Volume 1, Sir Walter Scott. The world for the first time heard an assembly of men born and educated in civilization and assuming the right to govern one of the finest of the European nations, uplift their voice to deny the most solemn truth which man's soul receives, and renounce unanimously the belief and the worship of a deity. When the High Court of Paris had rejected the worship of God, they celebrated in the streets of Paris, they hugged and kissed, they popped bottles and drank champagne. They gave gifts to each other. They burned Bibles. Sexual immorality was practiced openly. They said that there was no God and that there would be no accountability for sin. Live as you please was their philosophy, and death was pronounced to be an eternal sleep. This revolution ultimately became atheistic communism under Napoleon. The culmination of the revolution in 1798, Napoleon sent his general Berthier, who arrested the Pope and threw him in jail, where he died, striking the deadly wound. Brothers and sisters, let's revisit the previous Spirit of Prophecy statement. Education, page 228. The centralizing of wealth and power, the vast combinations of the enriching of the few at the expense of the many, the combinations of the poorer classes for the defense of their interests and claims, the spirit of unrest, of riot and bloodshed, the worldwide dissemination of the same teachings that led to the French Revolution, all are tending to involve the whole world in a struggle similar to that which convulsed France. Let's do a comparison from then, at the time of the French Revolution, to what is happening in the world today. Let's do a comparison from then until now. The text says, the centralizing of wealth and power. In 1913, a central bank was established. It's called the Federal Reserve Bank. It was established on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia by a group of wealthy men. It is a private bank that creates currency from nothing. It creates money out of thin air and lends that money to the federal government with interest. This empowers a small group of people who have complete control over the world's wealth. They're the global elite. The enriching of the few at the expense of the many. This is crony capitalism. Crony capitalism is a close financial relationship between leaders of corporations and politicians. We saw this unfair financial relationship between corporate America and the government in the 2008 housing market collapse. Countrywide Financial, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, Merrill Lynch, AIG, and Lehman Brothers. These are just some of the recognizable names from the long list of financial institutions that collapsed in the 2008 recession, while over 3 million Americans were foreclosed on and became homeless. The financial institutions that caused the problem got billions of dollars in taxpayer bailout money from the government. We saw Lloyd Blankfein, CEO of Goldman Sachs, Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan Chase, Maurice Greenberg, CEO of AIG, and James Kane, CEO of Bear Stearns, sit in front of Congress, do a lot of finger pointing, and told a bunch of lies to the American people. They all received taxpayer bailout money in the billions and billions of dollars, and nobody went to jail. Why? Because we were told that they were too big to fail. We were told that those banks, those financial institutions, were too big to fail. And the 3 million households that became homeless as a result of this, their only recourse was to join Occupy Wall Street and vent their bitter frustrations. This is crony capitalism, the enriching of the few at the expense of the many. We saw a repeat of this absurd behavior on the part of the government and corporate America in the 2020 coronavirus pandemic economic shutdown. Non-essential businesses were required to close and remain closed, while the corporate giants, all the big boys, were allowed to remain open and continue to do business. Actually, during the shutdown, Amazon, Walmart, Costco's, Home Depot, all corporate big boys added $637 billion to their already existing wealth. While the non-essential businesses, all the mom and pop stores, they were vaporized. And many of these businesses will never come back. They're closed for good. As of right now, these are the facts of this engineered economic meltdown. 50 million people are unemployed in America. 50 million people are unemployed in America. This is worse than the Great Depression of 1929. 29 million households are facing eviction. When the rent moratoriums end January 1st, 2021, 50 to 70 million people could be homeless, considering the idea that in each household is on average 2 or 3 people. So we're looking at 50 to 70 million people, quite conceivably, that could be homeless. The $600 stimulus checks ended, and the $1,200 stimulus checks are no longer being discussed. This is what happens in crony capitalism. The underprivileged get decimated and are forgotten about. There is a huge list of major companies that have filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Companies such as JCPenney, Hertz Rental Car, Neiman Marcus, and Latimer Airlines. They can't pay their rent or their employees. And the government has printed over $7 trillion of currency since March to keep the stock market from crashing. The NASDAQ, the S&P 500, and Dow Jones are all being kept alive by a gigantic printing machine which is owned by the Federal Reserve Bank. They're just printing money out of thin air. This will result in a complete devaluation of the dollar. We should fully expect hyperinflation in the very near future. And the US dollar, which is the world reserve currency, will soon come under extreme pressure. And I personally believe that the dollar is being debased because of all of this money printing and will yield its value to hard assets like gold and silver. Be prepared, brothers and sisters. Bet against the dollar. This is your hedge against inflation. America is bankrupt. America is the biggest debtor nation in the world. This is the world debt clock. This is the US debt clock. And as of October 2020, America is $27 trillion in debt. Did you hear that number, brothers and sisters? $27 trillion in debt. America is bankrupt. This is unsustainable. A financial collapse is inevitable in the very near future. And the US dollar, which is the world reserve currency, will soon come under extreme pressure. Question: when the government can't print any more money, what happens? The stock market will crash. There will be a run on the banks. Banks will close, and the housing market will collapse, and there will be a famine. Think Zimbabwe. Think Venezuela, a once wealthy country that became economically fatigued and bankrupt because of socialism and money printing. This leads me to my next point, which is the inevitable result. The spirit of unrest, of riot and bloodshed. We have all seen Antifa and Black Lives Matter, provoking riots and setting fires and looting businesses. The killing of innocent people and injuring civilians, journalists and police. We've seen the construction of autonomous zones, the burning of Bibles, and demands to defund the police, and also the releasing of violent inmates from prison. These riots and civil unrest have nothing to do with George Floyd at this point. This is a knee-jerk reaction of the disenfranchised, underprivileged of America and their absolute hatred for crony capitalism. The same teachings that led to the French Revolution are all tending to involve the whole world. Brothers and sisters, I want you to look at a video. And in the video, I want you to notice Bernie Sanders, who ran on the Democratic ticket in 2016, openly proclaimed to be a socialist. And also notice that the Jacobins are also involved in this radical, violent, socialist agenda in America.
Until recently, though, socialism had been relegated to the sidelines of American politics, and it's taken on more of a positive connotation thanks in large part to Bernie Sanders from Vermont.
When I talk about democratic socialism, I am talking about Medicare. When I talk about democratic socialism, I'm not looking at Venezuela. I'm not looking at Cuba. I'm looking at countries like Denmark and Sweden.
The 2016 presidential contender was a self-proclaimed democratic socialist who tapped into a huge and angry voting bloc of the country's disillusioned youth.
Financing college for all students in America really resonates with me.
Workers' rights,
Climate change.
he's planting the seed.
Closing the wage gap.
He cares about black students on this campus.
This is a movement that's going to exist for many, many years to come.
Sanders made socialism cool. He also paved the way for the rise of other charismatic politicians like him. House Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had volunteered on the Sanders campaign before deciding to run for Congress herself. She was an overnight sensation after her unprecedented victory in 2018.
Despite the fact that we were running against a 10-term incumbent, despite the fact that we didn't have the money, despite the fact that I'm working class, despite all those things, we won.
AOC fervor has swept the country.
We are in a moment where socialism is no longer a dirty word because people are affiliating it with those candidates who are already incredibly popular.
But this swell of popularity has also triggered new fervor against socialism.
Democrat lawmakers are now embracing socialism. They want to replace individual rights with total government domination.
So is this political zeitgeist that's upsetting the status quo a fad or the future of politics in America?
Tell me what democracy looks like! This is what democracy looks like!
To understand democratic socialism in America, it's best to start with the basics. Capitalism, socialism, and communism exist along a sort of economic spectrum. At one end, the government has total control over the economy, and at the other, little to none. Socialism is somewhere in between the two. It's a system where the government has nationalized most all major industries, but unlike communism, property and resources aren't owned and controlled by the state. Instead, the government redistributes the wealth to individuals in a way it deems fair and equitable. Democratic socialism lies somewhere between socialism and capitalism, depending on whom you talk to. Sanders had effectively tapped into a fresh crop of socialists, even though his platform wasn't offering anything particularly different to what he had already been talking about for decades.
In our society, theoretically a democratic society, you have a handful of people who control our economy. You have maybe 2% of the population that owns 1/3 of the entire wealth of America, 80% of the stocks, 90% of the bonds. And these people have incredible power.
Nearly 40 years later, Sanders' vision of a socialist America has finally gone mainstream. Bhaskar Sunkara was one of the early adopters. When he launched the magazine Jacobin in 2010, it was, in theory, a pretty bad idea. Not only was print dying, Bhaskar's niche quarterly was going to target America's socialists before the country had actually started talking or caring about socialism again. But the 21-year-old college student followed his gut, and the gamble paid off. Jacobin struck a nerve, and its circulation took off.
Socialism in the U.S. has been a marginal force for many decades, so I think we're kind of inventing things from scratch now.
The Democratic Socialists of America bills itself as the largest socialist organization in the country. It has its own firebrand version of socialism, with some members who want to abolish the Senate and get rid of capitalism.
America will never be a socialist country.
As the election looms, a national debate is raging. On one side, capitalism, free market economy, the individual creation of wealth.
Here in the United States, we are alarmed by the new calls to adopt socialism in our country.
On the other side, socialism, government control of enterprise, wealth shared by all.
Democratic socialism, to me, is creating a government and an economy and a society which works for all rather than just the top 1%.
Well, I just say that socialism will never happen in the United States, can't happen in the United States. And Venezuela, unfortunately, I have to use your country as the example of what socialism can do, how it can tear the fabric of a country apart. Joe Biden has pledged to reinstate the pro-communist policies of the Obama-Biden administration. They were pro-communist policies. The deal he made with Cuba was ridiculous. The patriots here today fled socialism to find freedom, and socialism and other things, as you know, and a step beyond socialism in many cases. And now Joe Biden and the radical left are trying to impose the same system, socialism plus, in America. Biden is a puppet of Bernie Sanders, AOC, the militant left, the people that want to rip down statues and monuments to George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, Jesus, okay, Jesus. They want to rip down statues to Jesus. So we're dealing with a group of people that they will not win. They will not win at all. But this election coming up is a very important one.
Lives matter for Greater New York. Good to have you with us tonight, sir. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You know, talking and on a bunch of different interviews today, and you said, burn it down. You said, burn it down. It's time. So that makes me think that you want to burn it down.
I said, if this country doesn't give us what we want, then we will burn down this system and replace it.
These Democrats are declaring socialism, but actually their agenda is communism. This is the beast from the bottomless pit. It's a revolutionary spirit, a spirit of rebellion that is trying to usurp political power by force. Bhaskar Sunkara, the editor of Jacobin magazine, is also the author of the Socialist Manifesto. So on the surface, this is a socialist ideology. And we all saw in the video clip that the Jacobins are alive and well. They were instrumental in the French Revolution. This is a secret society that is brutally violent by nature. And they are an integral part of these riots in this global revolution. The Jacobins are agitating this global revolution right now. Remember, brothers and sisters, the Jacobins are a radical political organization bankrolled by the Jesuits. Let's take a look at some of these Jacobin magazines to discern what their true purpose is. This is a Jacobin magazine, and it says on the front cover, a plan to make over a country. Or this could be construed as a plan to take over a country. Of course, the most important part of the plan is to implement brutality and intimidation. And look at this statement, a plan to win socialism in America. It is important to know that socialism in America would quickly gravitate into absolute full-blown communism in America. Here is another Jacobin magazine. It says Lincoln and Marx. Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president of the United States, and Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto. And it mentions American Jacobins. The Jacobins are not hiding their intentions to establish communism in America. They're not hiding it, brothers and sisters. Another Jacobin magazine, it says, "Hail to the mob." They are praising the rioters and all the violence and destruction. This is complete anarchy and lawlessness from Black Lives Matter and Antifa, the radical left. These domestic terrorists have assaulted police officers, committed arson, burnt down people's homes and businesses, looted stores and killed innocent people. They have done all of this to establish communism in America and around the world. Their philosophy is the ends justifies the means. The Jacobins can say, "Hail to the mob," because in America, this attitude is no longer appalling, but actually this behavior is acceptable and applauded. The Jacobins are saying, "Hail to the mob." The mob is also burning Bibles, just like they did in the French Revolution. On the cover of this Jacobin magazine, there's a guillotine. Question: why would you put a guillotine on the cover of your magazine? Because this radical political movement, the far left, plans to take this country by intimidation and force. And one of the articles in the magazine is entitled "A Guide to the French Revolution." The arrogance of the Jacobins is truly shocking, and their intentions are completely transparent. They fully intend to provoke a savage revolution. Brothers and sisters, here is a video where Patrisse Cullors, the founder of Black Lives Matter, admits that she is a Marxist, which means that she is a communist. Please listen carefully.
This is very, very important. One of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter, her name is Patrisse Cullors, C-U-L-L-O-R-S, I believe that's how you pronounce it. She, and I've told you that this is a Marxist, anarchist, anti-Semitic group, and that is exactly what it is. And so when people say, I stand with Black Lives Matter, or the mayor, Bowser of Washington, D.C. has that painted in massive way on a street where you can see it from space across from the White House. When these politicians are embracing now Black Lives Matter, I'm talking about Black Lives Matter, the organization, they're embracing a Marxist anarchist organization that is extremely well funded, heavily funded, and extremely well organized all over the country. And it's almost like the Weather Underground, except smartly what they've embraced is race as the issue through which to push their Marxism. When Marx says, do it any way you have to. That's why you see the environmental movement, in many ways, also borrows from Marx. The immigration movement also borrows from Marx. But in this case, these are trained Marxists, as she's about to tell you, and they are using race basically as a vessel through which to advance a Marxist revolution. They're for revolution. All right, let's take a look. Go.
I also think that it might, I think of a lot of things. The first thing I think is that we actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists.
Stop. We are trained Marxists. We're trained Marxists. So what I've been saying, probably for years now, is true. They're not hiding it. It used to be part of their mission statement. Their anti-Semitism, the BDS movement, they're not hiding it. Israel's an apartheid society. They're not hiding these things. Go.
We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on sort of ideological theories, and I think that what we really try to do is build a movement that could be utilized by many, many Black folk.
We're building a movement that can be used by many Black folk, but it's not just for Black folk. They're building a Marxist movement within the United States, and they're succeeding because of all the efforts of people to project their own attitudes and their own interests on top of it. Some of them are doing it unwittingly, but some are not. I mean, you actually have multi-millionaire in one case, and LeBron James, a billionaire athlete, was embracing a Marxist movement. And he's not the only one. Now you have Drew Brees doing it, as you'll see later, you have Brett Favre doing the same thing. It's a remarkable thing. Now let's take a look at CNN the other day, just a few days ago, also with Patrisse Cullors. It's spelled Cullors. I believe it's Colors. I'm not certain of it. And she's on with Jake Tapper, and you're going to see how utterly uninformed Jake Tapper is. Go.
A lot of criticism of former Vice President Joe Biden from civil rights activists. The election obviously will be a choice. How do you think Biden matches up compared to President Trump when it comes to these issues that are
out of office? He is not fit for office. And so what we are going to push for is a move to get Trump out, while we're also going to continue to push and pressure Vice President Joe Biden around his policies in relationship to policing and criminalization. That's going to be important, but our goal is to get Trump out.
We just heard Patrisse Cullors, the founder and leader of Black Lives Matter, just admit that she's a trained Marxist, meaning that she is a communist. And the purpose of this communistic movement is to get rid of Donald Trump and the conservative right. That's their true purpose. That's their focus. Brothers and sisters, did you notice that Black Lives Matter and Antifa had a makeshift guillotine? The mob is strolling through residential neighborhoods with a mock guillotine to intimidate people. Here, they're in front of Jeff Boaz's house with a guillotine. Jeff Boaz is the owner of Amazon and has a net worth of $200 billion. The 99% hates the 1%. And I understand that the guillotine was not real. But brothers and sisters, it is only a matter of time before this belligerent movement has real guillotines and begins to use them. It's only a matter of time. And for those people who think that this violent communist movement is just going to go away and disappear or evaporate, that's not true. That's not true because of two reasons. Number one, there are major companies that are supporting Black Lives Matter and this revolution with millions and millions of dollars. Corporations such as Walmart, Target, Home Depot, Old Navy, McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Airbnb, Cisco, Microsoft, Uber, Robinhood, Shopify, the NFL, the National Football League, American Airlines, Starbucks, Nike, Wendy's, and United Health Group. These are just some of the corporations that are supporting Black Lives Matter. This violent revolution is not going away. And the second reason why this communist movement will continue to gain strength is because Pope Francis is indirectly endorsing it in his newly published encyclical letter, Fratelli Tutti. The National Catholic Reporter released this article entitled Fratelli Tutti Challenges Unfair Wealth Distribution. So here, the Pope is saying that the 1% is being unfair to the 99%. And the insinuation is that this should change. The article goes on to say laying out a comprehensive vision for how the world should change after the coronavirus pandemic. Pope Francis imagines societies that are more caring, more focused on helping those in need, and fundamentally less attached to the principles of market capitalism. This statement is a dig at America because America is a capitalist nation. And what the Pope is implying here is that capitalism is unfair. As the article continues, the Pope is going to endorse an economic system of government that is fair in his opinion. Look at the fourth paragraph. The letter titled Fratelli Tutti, in a nod to the familiar bonds that connect all the world's people, at times articulates viewpoints that might well align with a democratic socialist manifesto. So the Pope's encyclical letter, Fratelli Tutti, is in agreement with socialism. The Socialist Manifesto is the Pope's answer to fix the economic problems in America and perhaps the world. Well, this makes complete sense because Pope Francis is a Jesuit, and the Jesuits have bankrolled the Jacobins, who have agitated this current global revolution on the far left. It's important to know that the Jesuits always work both sides of the conflict. This is the Hegelian dialectic. The Hegelian dialectic is when two or more opposing sides have a conflict, and from that conflict, the desired solution is obtained. The reason why I have told you that, brothers and sisters, is because there is another dynamic to this revolutionary spirit from the bottomless pit that is equally violent and associated with the conservative right. During the 2020 presidential debate, Donald Trump was asked to condemn violent white supremacist organizations that support him.
You have repeatedly criticized the vice president for not specifically calling out Antifa and other left-wing extremist groups. But are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups and to say that they need to stand down and not add to the violence in a number of these cities, as we saw in Kenosha and as we've seen in Portland?
Sure,
are you
I'm
prepared
willing to do
specifically
that, but
do it? Well, go ahead, sir.
I would say almost everything I see is from the left wing, not from the right wing.
So what are you saying?
I'm willing to do anything. I want to see peace.
Then do it, sir.
Say it. Do it. Say it. Do you want to call them? What do you want to call them? Give me a name. Give me a
white
name.
Supremacists and
who would
right
you like me to condemn?
White supremacists and right
Proud
militia.
Boys, stand back and stand by. But I'll tell you what. Somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left, because this is not a right-wing problem. This is a left-wing.
FBI director
This is a left-wing problem.
White supremacists.
The violent white supremacists that the moderator was referring to were armed militia groups, Bikers for Trump, the Ku Klux Klan, and the brutally violent Proud Boys. Founded in 2016 by Galvin McInnes, the Proud Boys are a far-right, neo-fascist, male-only organization that promotes and engages in political conflicts in the United States and Canada. The Proud Boys are largely responsible for the overnight destruction of Chicago on August 10th of this year. And the Proud Boys instigated the bloody confrontation with Black Lives Matter in Portland, Oregon. America is divided. The current civil unrest that we have been witnessing will be punctuated at the coming presidential election. No matter who wins the election, we should fully expect the results to be contested and opposed. The Democrats, this socialistic, communistic political platform which is controlled by the Jacobins, are threatening to possibly secede from the nation and perhaps cause a civil war. This article was first reported in the New York Times last summer. It is important to know 19 million guns and assault rifles have been sold in the last 6 months in the United States alone. These weapons have been purchased by Americans that are uncomfortable with the current political climate of defund the police and the continuous riots from these domestic terrorists. And labor unions, under the control of demons, will make this bloody civil unrest absolutely horrific. Counsels from the Spirit of Prophecy on Labor Unions and Confederacies, 10. Satanic agencies are becoming more determined in their rebellion against God. The trade unions will be the cause of the most terrible violence that has ever been seen among human beings. Did you hear that, brothers and sisters? The violence that we have witnessed so far in this country and around the world is nothing in compared to what we should expect in the future from the trade unions. It says the trade unions will be the cause of the most terriblest violence that has ever been seen among human beings. This is still in the future. This is what we can soon expect to happen in the near future. E.G. White, Letter 200, 1903, Selected Messages 2, 142. And the trade unions will be one of the agencies that will bring upon the earth a time of trouble such as has not been seen since the world began. A time of trouble that the world has never seen. This quote is in harmony with Daniel 12, verse 1. And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. This brings us right down here to the end of time and the closing events of Earth's history. And even though this all seems very disorderly, confusing, and out of control, it's not. They are all working together to accomplish their desired solution. When I say they, I am referring to the beast, the image of the beast, and the beast from the bottomless pit. Look at this quote in Maranatha, page 190. Clearly, it shows us that they are all working together, knowingly or unknowingly. Maranatha, page 190. When Protestantism shall stretch her hands across the gulf to grasp the hands of the Roman power, when she shall reach over the abyss to clasp hands with spiritualism, when under the influence of this threefold union, our country shall repudiate every principle of its constitution as a Protestant and Republican government, and shall make provision for the promulgation of papal falsehoods and delusions, then we may know that the time has come for the marvelous working of Satan and that the end is near. Let's identify the essential components of this quote to better understand it. First, let's identify the threefold union. Protestantism is apostate Protestantism. This is the image of the beast, church and state together. The Roman power in this quote is the papacy, which is the beast. And the papacy clasps hands with spiritualism. In this quote, spiritualism is not talking about a gypsy with a crystal ball or someone involved in astrology. Spiritualism here is referring to powerful, political, connected secret societies that openly worship Lucifer. Secret societies such as the Bilderberg Group, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Knights of Malta, the Trilateral Commission, the Committee of 300, Skull and Bones, the Club of Rome, the Illuminati, and the Jacobins. These secret societies are all front organizations developed by the papacy to accomplish her own purposes. Remember, brothers and sisters, this threefold union was in existence at the time of the French Revolution. The image of the beast, in a fundamental sense, did exist in the late 1700s. The Puritans in America did use the civil power of the government to persecute anyone who did not keep Sunday holy according to the Sunday Blue laws. The papacy was in existence in the late 1700s. It didn't receive the deadly wound until 1798. And the Jacobins and the Illuminati, which is spiritualism, provoked the French Revolution in the late 1700s. And this is the beast from the bottomless pit. So this threefold union, Protestantism, the image of the beast, Rome, which is the papacy, and spiritualism, these secret societies, the beast from the bottomless pit, all grab hands because they are all working together now. And according to the quote, they shall repudiate every principle of the Constitution as a Protestant Republican government. We are already witnessing the very principles of the Constitution being violated. The First Amendment states, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. We all saw this amendment violated when we were prevented from attending church during the coronavirus pandemic shutdown. And the amendment goes on to say, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble. We know we don't have freedom of speech anymore. If you say something against the LGBTQ or Black Lives Matter, you could lose your job or have some other kind of legal problems. And online articles and videos are being censored. This makes provision for the propagation of papal falsehoods and delusions. A good example of this is the Pope's lie that the coronavirus is the result of climate change. And the way to resolve climate change is to keep Sunday holy. The quote goes on to say, and then we may know that the time has come for the marvelous working of Satan and that the end is near. It doesn't matter who wins the 2020 election. The results will drive an even deeper wedge into the already politically divided nation. Subsequently, we should expect riots and civil unrest to reappear. This is what we should expect moving forward. According to the Bible, the final test that is brought to bear upon man is a financial test in which there will be no buying and selling unless you receive the mark of the beast. Revelation 13, verses 16 and 17. We are already seeing a financial system that is completely distressed as a result of this global economic shutdown. The stock market is totally disconnected from the real economy. The stock market is being manipulated by quantitative easing, financial injections, and a continuous, seemingly never-ending supply of government stimulus money. This government money has kept the stock market afloat, padded the pockets of these already affluent big corporations, and allowed zombie companies to remain on life support. But this is all unsustainable. This artificial financial system of fiat paper currency and printing money out of thin air to preserve the economy will all come to an end. And the end will be awful. This engineered financial crisis is already upon us. When this stock market crashes, this will be unlike anything that we have ever witnessed in the history of the world and will hit the real economy like a sledgehammer. The banks will close, leaving most people financially helpless and completely devastated. Then the housing market will collapse. Everyone will be affected by this financial devastation, and those who are not prepared will pay a severe price. Protect yourself, brothers and sisters. Here's a caveat. Purchase some hard assets like precious metals that will have value and sustain you during this financial crisis. Because there is a financial reckoning that is coming. I am telling you, it is coming. And most people are going to get wiped out. In Venezuela, when the economy collapsed because of socialism and hyperinflation, 1 ounce of silver bought you 3 months of food, and 1 ounce of gold could buy a house. Did you hear that, brothers and sisters? In Venezuela, when that country's economy collapsed, 1 ounce of silver bought you 3 months of food, and 1 ounce of gold bought you a house. Take a good look at this, brothers and sisters, because this is what is coming to America. And for those who think that obtaining precious metals is unimportant, what you need to know is that the banks are buying gold themselves. A number of central banks have loaded up on gold in the last year, according to data from the World Gold Council. They are backing up the truck and loading up on gold and silver. So the banks are buying gold and silver for themselves, while most of us are depending on this soon-to-be worthless paper fiat currency. Also, we should expect unemployment to continue to soar. As of right now, 50 million people are unemployed in America alone. and almost 1 million people file for unemployment every week. And when the eviction moratorium ends at the end of December, with millions of people unable to pay their rent or mortgage, the homeless crisis will absolutely explode. Los Angeles and other parts of California are experiencing this now. This is not a third world country. This is the Socialist Republic of California. This is what socialism does to a nation. We should fully expect famines in the country and around the world. In this article, it says that 54 million Americans are hungry and without enough food. This is terrible. And it's going to get worse. MS 114, 1899. In India, China, Russia, and cities of America, thousands of men and women are dying of starvation. The moneyed men, because they have the power to control the market, they purchase at low rates all they can obtain and then sell it at greatly increased prices. This means starvation to the poorer classes and will result in a civil war. Did you hear that, brothers and sisters? We should fully expect a famine in America in the very near future that will ultimately gravitate into a civil war. Brothers and sisters, do you have enough food in your house? Do you have enough food for 6 months? Do you have enough food for a year? If you don't, I would advise you to go stock up on food now while you are still able. The time of trouble is coming. Please be prepared. We should also expect riots and violent protests to get worse and worse. And remember, labor unions will introduce the most brutalist forms of violence. This will be the time of trouble like the world has never seen before. It is entirely possible that the military will be patrolling the streets and martial law will be declared. We should also expect great natural disasters to escalate with more frequency and greater intensity. I know that this sounds like a horror story, a lot of gloom and doom, but this is reality. This is where we are in the light of Bible prophecy. Brothers and sisters, when this situation becomes absolutely unbearable, where people have no money because of the economic collapse, homelessness all over the country and around the world, food shortages and famines, riots and civil unrest, everything I have described here has the earmarks of and will be the result of socialism/communism, which is the far left, the beast from the bottomless pit. People will desire relief from this. They are going to look for a solution and will turn to the conservative right. This is church and state together. The conservative right will appear as if God is blessing them. They will satisfy the needs of the people. They will accommodate all the needs of the people. To prove that God is with them, they will perform miracles, which will deceive many into thinking that this is the great power of God. There will also be the appearance of dead friends and relatives declaring to occupy an exalted position in heaven. This will be a new era of the church, a new church age, a Christian utopia, the millennium in which the world will be converted to Christianity. And when these desperate people who are completely dependent upon the government, the image of the beast, this church-state setup, will pull the Sunday law out of their back pocket and legislate Sunday as a holy day, and will cause all the world to worship the first beast, the papacy. And most of the world will accept it unknowingly and receive the mark of the beast. I have already told you, brothers and sisters, about the Hegelian dialectic. The Hegelian dialectic is when two or more opposing sides have a conflict, and from that conflict, the desired solution is obtained. The desired solution is the Sunday law. The desired solution is the Sunday law. Brothers and sisters, our only hope to faithfully survive this crisis is to stay close to God. Read and study your Bible. Spend time in prayer with God. And remember, brothers and sisters, Jesus has promised the Comforter, the Holy Spirit. We should all be preparing to receive the latter rain and the wedding garment of Jesus, his robe of righteousness. This is going to conclude part 2 of this series, The Beast from the Bottomless Pit. And I want to thank you, brothers and sisters, for joining me.